It looks like a few arriving, so that's good.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. My name's Claire from CIISec. We'll be handing over in just a moment. We'll just give it a few more minutes for people to enter the webinar. But the purpose of the webinar this morning is to have a look at some of the findings that were apparent from our recent piece of research, State of the Security Profession. So Amanda Finch, CIISec CEO, will be joining Piers Wilson, who is a fellow and CIISec board member and one of the lead authors of the report. And they're going to pick out some highlights and trends from this year's report and have a look at what challenges this might bring to the security profession. So sit back and enjoy. And I hope you've all had a chance to have a look at the report. But there will be a link going into the chat so that you can either have that in front of you or certainly use it to refer back to after the webinar.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Happy Friday to everybody. I will be really just the glue between the various sections of the report, because Piers will be doing the majority of the talking because he's the main author. Piers, we've been running this report for about 10 years now. I mean, it's evolved quite a lot over that time. When we first started doing it, it was more of a member survey to try and work out what we could do better and help the members and all of that sort of thing. And we gradually added more and more questions to it so that it's more about the profession than really about CIISec. And it's involved, it's being increasingly referenced. We seem to get into raconteur every time now with it. So it's definitely getting some standing within the community. What we tend to have is some standing areas, so we can see measurement over time. But each year we have a focus area, and this year the focus area is AI. So Piers, you're going to take us through the highlights and look at the focus areas and look at some of the trends for us. Is there anything I've missed, or is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so. I mean, that's a fair summary. I mean, yes, the early versions of this report we produced were off the back of a sort of a member survey in terms of sort of satisfaction, you know, what they saw as being the challenges of the security profession. But it has grown over the years to be much more open. So, you know, when we are collecting data, and, you know, we'll start the process again soon for next year's report, the you know, the link and the submissions are open to all. So we're very keen to get, obviously, CIISec member views, but also, you know, those people that are yet to be members or are, you know, are entering the profession at the younger tiers too. So, you know, the value of this really is the breadth and diversity and the numbers of people that have contributed. So yeah, as you said, it's grown to being quite a big piece of work and quite a significant piece of research, and it does attract a fair amount of attention. And in fact, one of the early goals of producing this was to help raise the profile of the Institute for its members so that it's more widely recognised. So yeah, if I go to some of the main findings and you know the writing.
A big thank you for doing this. I don't think people realise quite how much work it takes you to do this.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have help, don't we? I mean, you know, the design work and some of the writing now, of course, as well, is sort of you know, we get some experts in on some of those things. But yeah, it's a big project for the Institute, I think.
It's a big chunk. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you've got any questions, we're going to try and pick them up as we go along. So can you stick any questions in the chat? And
yeah, go for it.
I'll find a a spot, and then we'll pick up the questions as and when we can.
Definitely.
Right, over to you, Piers. And I
Yeah.
promise.
So yeah, I mean, I think the key findings, this is, much of this is lifted from the report itself. So if you've read this, then you'll recognise this page. But the focus area every year is always interesting. We've covered things like diversity and inclusion and ransomware and areas that have really had the focus of professionals, and clearly AI is, for a year or two now, has been a huge advance, and that's reflected, I think, in some of the research outcomes. Around half of professionals in this sector believe that AI and machine learning will be influential in the coming year, and I think we'd probably all agree there'll be winners and losers in terms of people that will benefit from the advent of AI and language models and the analysis type services, as well as people who perhaps suffer. And the biggest example, I think, in the security industry is perhaps whether AI is going to benefit those people trying to attack systems and find ways in to steal data, or those defending systems and trying to counter those attacks. So that's been interesting. We always ask about skills and recruitment and career planning, partly because, of course, some of our members are organisations. We have corporate members who are trying to retain their teams and trying to attract new members. So it's useful for them to know what people are motivated, why people are motivated to take and stay in jobs, and also, of course, for the members to know, what the underlying trends in terms of demand for professionals is. We always look at the challenges and threats, and certainly for organisations, it's the handling of breaches and the way that incidents are enter the public consciousness, and how to deal with them in an effective way. But also for individuals, in terms of the I suppose the level of work or the stress or the pressure that we all have working in the cybersecurity industry, which can be quite adversarial. You're trying to deal with, in many cases, a motivated and well-resourced and able attacker if you're working in incident investigations, for instance, or you're trying to defend what's important to a business, with a constrained budget and under the sort of the rules of corporate life. So the challenges and threats are always covered, and as I mentioned, the careers, the security market, the growth of the industry in terms of career prospects and rising budgets and things like that. And then, of course, there's always the demographic questions in terms of the age, the educational background. We always look at gender and ethnic balances as well, to try and understand how over time we are shifting the dial on some of the past distortions, I suppose, in the security market. So that's really the key points, and that's I suppose the headlines for that goes into the sort of press release and that leads off the report.
Right, we haven't got any questions yet, so on to artificial intelligence. Yeah,
well, let's talk about this, because this is obviously one of the big themes, and I'm not going to sort of read out every percentage here, but there was some quite interesting views. I mean, one of the key ones, I think, the infographic on the left, you can see that there was certainly a perception that there'd be a positive impact for cybersecurity attackers, and I think we've all seen that with things like better written, more convincing AI emails and deep fakes in the social media space as well. But there's a benefit as well for people defending systems and for industry, and also for academia, which I think is perhaps not surprising given the ease it can make research and things like that. So there's certainly winners and losers, and you get to the point where you think, well, if I'm in a senior role, if I'm a skilled worker, which in cybersecurity most people are, then there's a fair chance, I think, that AI will benefit you in your job, at least to some extent. And we also, of course, asked to understand the level of adoption of AI in terms of whether people are experimenting with it and using it in a fairly informal way, or whether as an organization they've started to embed it into their into their services or into their processes, or in the security operations center, perhaps into how they understand data and understand attacks that are unfolding. So there's lots of ways that individuals could informally or formally be using AI as well as within businesses, and you can you can ask ChatGPT to write a piece of code to carry out a particular task, and you get a snippet of Python that you could probably write yourself if you were so inclined, but actually it does democratize some of that sort of IT development work. But on the other hand, would you want to be using that to actually create code that was going to be used in a production environment? Perhaps not. So there's a range of adoptions, from looking at to learning about to experimenting to actually having full systems that are using AI to understand attacks or to help detect fraud or other instances. So yeah, quite a lot on AI, and there was some quite perhaps not surprising, but some quite useful figures, I think, in there. And there's no shortage of research on AI and its adoption elsewhere as well. So that's been quite a big area. Is there any questions on that, or do you want me to sort of move on to the next?
Sort of comment basically is that and it's a question for you really from me, Piers, is that do you think that we'll end up with the position where my AI is talking to your AI and we're just supervising them? That's
well,
one question.
In some ways it's hard to see where things are going. I mean, one of the things that I have seen is, for all the research about how wonderful AI is, of course it has its challenges, and there's some good examples, I think, where I think Meta and Google produced some research, and obviously big AI driven companies on how good is AI at logical reasoning, and actually they found it's not at the moment. The current state of technology will take other examples of logical reasoning that are similar, and they'll reapply it to the question they're being asked, and it's not necessarily logical conclusions you can draw. And there's a great example of somebody tried to get AI to create a video of the Tour de France, and this resultant video is I mean, it's hilarious to watch. It's basically just constant crashes and horrendous comings together, and it's well, as I say, I mean, laughable really, but of course the conclusion they drew was that the training data that's being used is the clips and the news reports and the highlight reels, if you like, that get posted for that event, and they tend to show the crashes and the eventful moments. They miss out the thousands of kilometers that are cycled when people are pedaling away and everything is fine. So you've got to think about the way we use training data. You've got to think about are you actually getting logical inferences from your AI engines, or just is it replaying what it's seen in its training phase? And whether AI engines will be talking to each other. I mean, there's a fair chance, I think, that there'll be AI built into various systems that communicates with other systems. But we're probably a little way away from the point where the eyeballs turn into red light emitting diodes and suddenly everything goes autonomous by itself. So there's certainly, I think, challenges in the adoption of probably any new technology, but AI certainly is one. Yeah. So
I'm just wondering whether it will actually learn human fallibility, and I think your example of the Tour de France comes out quite nicely with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's on YouTube. I mean, Google AI Tour de France or words to that effect, and you get this this sort of laughable creation of what is basically just a series of horrendous crashes. But yeah, it's a good example of how training data can be skewed. You don't always get what you expect. So yeah, moving on from AI, we always ask about breaches that people feel have been handled well and badly. What can we learn from the cases where businesses have been attacked and have actually done a good job of dealing with it, and those, of course, that perhaps haven't. And we can all cite examples. I'm certainly not going to read any out on this webinar, but there are some in the report that have been mentioned as being sort of good examples or bad examples. But the interesting, I think, thing I think is the reasons why breaches are memorable. We're asking people to tell us the best and worst example they can think of, rather than the best and worst example by any kind of objective metric. So it's really down to the memorableness or the significance as perceived by the industry, and the reasons for that are again, perhaps not surprising, but quite notable. So good communication with victims, that's much most years that comes out top as the reason why good incidents have been handled well and why bad incidents have been handled badly. The speed of response, how adept and rapid and how fast you deal with the problem and how quickly you communicate, how open businesses are. I think when these things happen, any sort of evasiveness is always sort of frowned upon. And evidence of learning from past incidents. If you're hit by something new, there's perhaps a lot more sympathy than if if you suffer from what might be a 20-year-old attack or a very old vulnerability, and the way you deal with the victims, the sophistication of the attack and what that means for the people that have been affected. So there's certainly some good factors that we can draw from this as being how to deal with breaches in a good, proficient, capable way, and how to avoid being sort of remembered as that terrible attack at a certain company that everybody looks at and sort of frowns upon. So there's some really good steers here, I think, in terms of what makes a breach either a good breach. There's no such thing, but what makes a breach something that was handled efficiently, and what makes a breach something that is memorably bad for those working in security.
I think there's some lovely things in the survey, is that, as you say, there's some really good advice about where breaches have been handled well.
Yeah.
The honesty seems to be the best policy with that.
It does. Yeah. The communication, the openness, the speed of response. The showing that you are willing to put your hand up and accept the problems have been caused and how it's affecting people. The data subjects in a lot of breaches can be quite adversely affected and can be quite worried. If you've lost a load of credit card numbers or logins, people get worried about somebody accessing their bank accounts, stealing their money, placing orders on their behalf. And I think organizations have to remember that for all the stress and the problems it's causing them, for the individuals that might be affected, it can be quite a frightening time. So definitely.
No, absolutely. And one of the stats that I loved is that the best handled breaches are the ones that you don't know about because they've been handled.
Well, there is that, isn't there? There's
that's a lovely comment.
That's it's quite a frequent observation that if you had a problem and handled it well and quickly and efficiently and dealt with it, people may not know there was actually much of a breach. I mean, it will be reported to the ICO possibly, but the impact on the user or the data subject or the partner organization, I think, is always the thing that you've got to keep front of mind in these cases, certainly.
So a couple of plugs for CIISec on this is that we're going to be looking at ransomware at CIISec Live on the 26th of November down in Bristol. And we're also looking to next year bring together a small positioning paper on sort of handling breaches, potentially in the first 24 hours, what you need to do. So we want to get some practical advice coming out of the report. Before we move on, we have a question from Michaela about AI. She says, is there a body of knowledge or some sort of framework for AI in application to cyber security? What have you seen? I don't know. I'm sure there's something in the
I will say there's an awful lot of research being done into not just how AI engines can work, but also what some of the challenges are. So I saw some stats. Was it yesterday, day before, that said along the lines of 99% of CEOs believe that AI is going to be critical to their business going forward, but of the AI trials or investigations or pilots, proof of concepts that have been used, only about 13% of those actually make it into production. So we're certainly in that kind of hype cycle process, I think, where the promises and the aspirations of AI are perhaps somewhere ahead of what the reality is now. But there's no shortage of research on various aspects, and I think you've got to sort of pick your use case or pick your problem and look at that. So there's certainly been worries that AI will be used to craft deep fake videos that in a future year, will this be me talking to you guys over a webinar, or will we have an AI version of me giving the same presentation and answering the same questions? The in this scenario, it's sort of neither here nor there. But if you're talking on a business meeting and it looks as if somebody is attending and actually it turns out not to be, then those deep fake scenarios can be quite serious. And you've also got the the more trivial example of getting people to write phishing emails or try and find systems that might be vulnerable to certain types of attack, or how can I get a job in this organization even to become a sort of a malicious insider. So there's lots of research on how it could be used against us as defenders of networks and systems, but there's also of course a lot of investigation into how we can use AI to more quickly understand or respond or detect the attacks that are being mounted against us too. And perhaps the Tour de France example is probably a good example of that. If you're looking at the data that is published on the internet about cybersecurity, you've got to bear in mind that any detection engine is going to be based on learning from that data. So you may get a slightly skewed view of the world, in the same way that most of the Tour de France is not crashes of hundreds of cyclists at a time. It's thousands of kilometers and hour after hour of people cycling around the French Alps. There's a difference between what is normal and what is good, and how you can learn from that, which in the case of the cycling races, how can you pedal more quickly and get there sooner, rather than trying to avoid crashes all the time and how to get back on your bike if you fall off. So I think there's perhaps no one body of knowledge, but there's no shortage of research, and we are at the stage, I think, where the jury is out in some respects on how this can be used and how best it can help us.
And that, I think, answers Michaela's second question. Is there anything to share based on industry, and if regulation or regulator has any contribution to this? I think it's
there are certainly industries that have been early adopters. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about AI in medical scenarios. For instance, looking at X-rays for signs of cancer, and that is reportedly, from what I've seen, faster and more accurate than a human. So if you can double or treble or multiply your rate of cancer screening in terms of the numbers you can deal with and the accuracy which you can detect tumors, then that's a brilliant outcome for everybody. Even if there's a few false positives and false negatives, it's still going to be better than a flawed human process. And we've all, I think, seen in the banking industry people using pattern recognition and patterns of attacks to detect credit card fraud and unusual transactions, and whether that's true AI or just sort of learnt patterns is another matter. But it's certainly useful, I think, in that regard. But the other side of it, of course, is if an AI can create a realistic head that can get past Face ID, or can create a version of my voice that can get through a verbal authentication system, then obviously we've got problems. So there's certain, I think, areas where the pros and cons are most acute, that you can draw some reassurance or some concern from.
Before we move off AI, I'd just like to share something funny that I heard on the radio yesterday. There's been a granny created to waste the time of spammers. And it was absolutely hilarious that she kept calling everybody dear, and the language was hilarious. And she was really frustrating these scammers that were trying to get money out of her and everything. So maybe that's a way that we can get botnet grannies on the case to slow down the scammers.
There's no shortage of ideas, I think, and that's the interesting part of it. Yeah.
Right. Talking of grannies, on to demographics.
Yeah. So I mean, we always ask the demographic questions. I mean, most surveys do. I think in security and STEM subjects in general, I think we're all acutely aware that historically it's been a largely white male dominated profession, and one of the things as an institute we're keen to do is to make sure that we expand the breadth and diversity of our profession. We're dreadfully short of people to come and work in security anyway. The skills shortage is well documented. So, one thing we can't afford to do is to put people off by them thinking it's not a world they want to inhabit. So, we certainly always ask about ethnic mix, which is not on this slide. We always ask about the ratio of men and women, getting more women into STEM in general, getting them interested at school when they're making their GCSE and A-level choices and going off to do degrees or to get their first jobs or pick up apprenticeships. There's throughout the age range, it's important to get that diversity in place. And I think, from my own point of view, there's value in having lots of different people with different backgrounds and different ways of approaching problems. There's nothing perhaps more toxic than an all-male team driven by sort of testosterone and bravado, when actually you sometimes want someone that can just step back and think, what's the bigger picture here. So the gender balance is something that we are, I suppose, working on, and as you can see from the infographic there on the right, there's plenty more to do on that in that regard. And also the age of people working in the industry. And I think I'd perhaps caution this infographic, because the Institute, although the survey is open to all, many of our members and much of our focus has been in the past on experienced, qualified professionals with a track record. We've perhaps tended to lean towards the older age groups, but clearly more work on the cyber EPQ, which comes in at A-level age, and with apprenticeships and with the degrees that now focus on cybersecurity. We'd want to see over time a greater proportion of people in the younger age groups. More people coming in to do entry-level jobs aged 25 and working up through the ranks in the same way many of us have. So the diversity in both age and background terms is very key to the Institute, and I think very important to the profession as well. We can't afford to put people off. As I said, we need as many people interested to take up the mantle and start helping us to protect our systems.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's driven our D&I program. We did the focus on D&I. I think it was last year or the year before, and that we have an active D&I program, and we're looking at the gender diversity, and we're seeing some great things happening with the EPQ. The last year, the four best top articles were by girls, and what we need to do is that we need to be showing them role models so that they see people that look like them in the industry. Similarly, from diversity of backgrounds as well, so that people that are from different racial groups and things like that, and also the levelling up. I think one of the things that we saw when we took over the EPQ is that it wasn't really available to inner city schools, because they had no money to do it. And with some funding from DSIP, we've seen some great strides of getting into less well-off areas, which is great. So we really need.
And as well, I think in terms of people that are that have disabilities, or the neurodiverse community, there's huge scope within cybersecurity for everybody to play a major role and to share in, I suppose, the successes of those that are in the industry right now, which that does come out in the survey, that it's a good place to be for career progression, remuneration, for prospects and training. And I think for those people that want to keep learning, we'd probably all agree as professionals that one of the good things about IT in general, but certainly cybersecurity, is you're constantly having to keep your skills up to date and learn new things. What we're defending against now wasn't a problem 40 years ago, or sadly viruses, patches and passwords perhaps were, but we are dealing with an evolving attacker, so we have to keep that arms race going. So
absolutely. So yes, right. Moving on.
Which I suppose brings us on to perhaps one of the less positive statistics in the survey. We are aware, of course, that when resources are tight and budgets are scarce and threats are growing and technology is getting more complex, that the role of the cybersecurity professional is a demanding one. And certainly from that point of view, we appreciate everyone's time today, but we do ask what people's level of workload is, what they're worried about, what keeps them up at night. And one of the areas I think is you know, the workload, the amount of time people are working, and unsurprisingly, you know, most jobs in the profession are full-time jobs, but increasingly there are sort of part-time roles, I think, where people have got perhaps you know, childcare responsibilities, or where they want a portfolio career, which is really a new thing. But you know, we also then do see a number of people who are having to work quite long hours to get their job done, and in some cases beyond what the World Health Organization recommends as being a sort of a safe, you know, safe working week, or an acceptable number of hours to be working. So, you know, we have to recognise the fact that professionals can be overworked. They can be dealing with a lot of stress, and working very hard to keep data and systems protected, which is, you know, certainly, I think, not something we should take for granted, and not something we should necessarily be happy about if people are going to risk burning out over a period of time. So that's one of the things that I think the survey does show, that it can be a very lucrative, very interesting, very developmental career, but it can also be hard work and quite stressful.
Absolutely. And at CIISec, we've been looking at this as well. We are founder members of MHICS, the catchy title, which stands for Mental Health in Cybersecurity. And they are working to produce sort of guidelines to help employers and look at ways of reducing stress. So we're a big supporter of that. Similarly, we've been working with a charity called, which is PTSD Resolution, and that they are taking some of the learning that they've had from people coming back from the battle fields, and helping people within cyber to deal with stress. And we're hoping to launch something next year. Well, we will be launching something next year with our corporate members, where we can provide training for them to be able to embed good working practices within their organisation, and also implement a confidential helpline for people that are suffering from stress. So it's something that's very close to my heart. And I think we all, as a community, need to address it, because we're going to be losing really talented people if we don't be addressing this. And those figures are just really high. With
I mean, I think as well, you know, if you think about some of the roles that you know, people fulfill in the profession, you know, I mean, I've, you know, back in the dim and distant past, seen, you know, penetration testing, you know, projects where, you know, it's test after test after test after test, and you can be doing, you know, the same work over and over again, you know, week in, week out, and often finding the same problems or similar problems. And, you know, that can be disheartening and frustrating. And you come back to do the same test a year later from the test, you know, you get a repeat gig at the annual review, and you find the issues you flagged up last year are still issues. And, you know, it can make people think, you know, like, what am I doing here? You know, just telling people every time I go and see them that they need to fix this or be better with patching, and you know, that can be disheartening. And, you know, people that work in incident investigations, you know, they go from crisis to crisis to crisis to crisis. So, you know, there are job roles, I think, where we have to recognize that the you know, it can take its toll. I think it can take its toll. But you know, we you know, as the survey, we're not going through it today, but as the survey will show, it's an industry that's paid well and well respected, and a lot of expertise. But you know, it can be hard work, I think, and a tough gig at times.
Absolutely, and we sort of need to give people a sort of a theoretical hug, basically, to make sure.
Well, yeah, I think recognizing the workload and the effort that people are putting in, I think, is a key thing for organisations looking to retain their security teams. Otherwise, it's you know, you burn someone out, they leave. You've got to hire someone in again and train them up from scratch. So
yeah, absolutely.
Which I suppose brings us on to one of the things around skills. You know, we asked people in the profession, you know, about the skill shortage, and, you know, what kinds of skills do the people working in security now believe are most useful, most beneficial, what are most in demand. And of course, technical subject matter expertise skills are quite key, but, you know, it's always been apparent to me that you can train someone and teach them technical skills. You know, even communication skills, you can get them to be better at writing, better at presenting, better at you know, better at sending emails. But the areas that's always been strong, and you can see, you know, from the chart here, you know, with the different years, consistently what professionals see as being most useful, most sought after, are the analytical thinking, problem solving skills that are able to be applied to new situations, new threats, new technologies, you know, new challenges that we all face in the industry. So the most useful type of person is somebody that can think, somebody that can be given a challenge they haven't seen before and try and work their way through it. I think the other thing that's significant about this graph is that when we look at, you know, why people leave jobs, one of the key areas is bad management and you know, poor investment in their own development. And yet, of course, when we ask professionals, as you can see at the top of this chart, whether management skills are useful and sought after, actually, you know, they sort of rank last. So we've got a bit of a disconnect there between the reasons why people might be unhappy in their jobs and might look to leave, and actually what kind of skills we as a profession think are useful. And probably the conclusion from this chart that I would draw is that whilst thinking, problem solving, analytical skills are clearly something that we need to grow and develop and seek out, we also need to recognize that subject matter skills, communication skills, and the ability to manage teams and manage projects and manage budgets and manage the business is key as well. And we perhaps underlook that as an importance in the profession.
Yes, I think that people get roles thrust upon them very often, and that you end up being a manager of a small team when you.
It does happen, doesn't it? Yeah, you see the most experienced, cleverest person ends up running the team and doing the line management job rather than what they're best at. And yeah, but you know, we don't, well, certainly from this data, we don't rate those skills highly. However, if you look at the reason people leave jobs, you know, elsewhere in the report, it's you know, bad management can be one of the reasons they look elsewhere. So keen to develop that as well.
And one of the things that we've been doing at CIISec, I'm sure many of you know about it already, is that we have the Associate Development Programme, which takes newbies to the profession and gives them a rounded understanding of what the profession is. But we're also, we've been running very successfully for the last year, a full member development programme, which helps professionals try and deal with some of these more ethereal things of, you know, how do you present a business case to the business and to management, and how do you go around managing a small team and things like that. So again, I think the community can do quite a lot to help.
Yeah, there's a lot to
build those skills, definitely. Right.
Sure.
Back to you.
So yeah, I mean, this is really where we leave off. I mean, we started. I think this year might be the first year we actually included this, but we can draw conclusions from the research. But what are the recommendations that we, I think, as an institute can give based on the research data that we've gathered, and you know, there's really a few points that I think are quite key. And you know, one of the ones is, as I mentioned, attracting people from different backgrounds into the profession. You know, with skills scarce and with such diversity of different types of technical role and managerial role, communication skills, you know, we can really use anybody that's got any interest or aptitude, and we should seek that out. So you know, that's one of the areas, you know, growing the profession in terms of numbers and skills. But then also ensuring that the profession allows people themselves to grow and feel appreciated. You know, we can emphasize the fact that it pays well and it's a good solid career that's, you know, never going to go away. But we need to recognize the stresses and the workload that we're putting people under, and make sure we invest in the training and the education so that teams can keep building capabilities, can keep developing, and that individuals are growing in their skill sets and they have the opportunity to work in more senior technical roles or in more communicative roles or into management. In terms of focusing on breaches, we covered this at length, I think, but certainly communication, the speed of response, the openness is paramount. And that does tie into, rapid technical understanding and rapid analysis, but also in terms of how you communicate with the rest of the business and the board, and ultimately, of course, data subjects and possibly the regulators too. So, there's certainly more that can be done to help organisations grow their incident response capability and how they deal with threats when they occur, whether it's running through desktop exercises, as we've mentioned here, or allowing staff and technical teams to be trained and to have that understanding about what the wider implications might be. And lastly, we're constantly having to understand new technologies. At the moment, AI is pretty much everywhere you look. And we've had the same thing with cloud computing. We had the same thing with mobile phones and smartphones, with the same thing, even if you look back in the 90s, to the internet and email and websites. So, we're constantly having to deal with new technologies that are highly disruptive and change the way businesses work. And, at the moment, AI is one of the ones that I think is really starting to change the shape of organizations and the way people use IT. And that has implications and benefits for security professionals just like everybody else. And we need to be aware of that, I think. So that's what we drew, I think, as the main conclusions, the main recommendations for organizations and individuals. And but as I say, there are a lot of stats in the report, a lot of data points that can be used. And our sort of main hope, and I've said this I think a few times, that if this research enables one successful business case to invest in a technology or a process that averts a breach happening, then it's served its purpose. So there's a lot of useful data in there that I think can be used to reinforce what we perhaps might already know, that we do need to invest in security and make sure we protect data and systems.
That's well, Piers, that's brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of research. It's very, very valuable, and as you say, use the stats and use them to drive business cases and to drive change.
And I'd say as well, I mean, contribute to the survey. I mean, the next year's data collection will start soon once we've finalised the question set and got that rolling. So, do please contribute, whether you're a member or just an interested member of the profession and have no other connection to the institute. It doesn't matter. Everybody's views are important, and the more data, the wider the range of people's inputs that we get, the better. It's always useful to see the shift of of views between either different demographics or between people that have been through incidents and people that haven't, in terms of what their fears are around that. So please do contribute, because the survey wouldn't be anything without the people that spend the time answering the questions.
Absolutely, and very timely. Danny's come through with just saying thanks to mainly you, Piers, because you've been doing all the hard work for a very interesting presentation. Will this be available on catch up in some form? Well, you've got the report, but also this webinar will be loaded onto our website as well. So yes. Any questions that you may have, Piers and I will be delighted to answer them after this.
Yeah.
And also, if you've got any suggestions of things that you'd like to have included or topics that can be explored, we're always listening to that as well.
Yeah, we can definitely, as I say, we choose a theme or two every year to really focus on. So it's always good to steer in that direction.
So thank you to everybody for coming along, and a big thank you again to Piers for driving this work for 10 years now.
Well done to the whole team. The people in the secretariat, Dominic and Claire, that have worked hard on it as well. It's a team effort, and it does generate a lot of work, certainly. So
Right. Oh, Bob is typing something now. That's lovely. Thank you. That's great. I think you've explained it so well that everyone's just going to go away now and delve into the report.
Yeah.
So we'll probably end up with loads of questions after this. So
sure, no problem at all.
Thank
We can take those.
you to everybody for coming along.
Okay,
take care.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for listening.
It's just you and me now.
We're done. Good. Well, that went all right. I think it was good.
I think that went really well. That it flowed really nicely, and
well, you did a good job on
lots
the
of thumbs
on that
up
email
and
sort of agenda thing. That was really useful to have that just to kind of refer to, actually. So that was good. Well done on that front. And yeah, I mean the slide. I mean every time I do the presentation at live in the past, the slides are easy enough to do because you just grab the graphics straight out of the report and talk about them a bit. But yeah, that did work really well, I think. So
I think this will have more longevity as well, because we can stick it up
I
there.
think it's better doing
Probably.
this as a webinar rather than at live, because you only get at live you only get the member audience, whereas this can be anybody.
Stop recording. Hang on, I don't know how to
Oh
do
yeah,
that.
we should do something. Yeah,
because it's a different. Let's stop recording.
Yeah.
Right, stop recording.